Hi, I'm Stephen Paluga, and I've been working on solving our national debt crisis for years and posting my progress in videos on this channel. But every once in a while, I have to take a break from figuring out the path we should take to advise on one we shouldn't, and this is going to be one of those times. This is the FairTax Act, and I'm going to cover 10 reasons why you should not support it. The quote-unquote Fair Tax Act calls for the repeal of individual income taxes, payroll taxes that fund Social Security and Medicare, estate and gift taxes, business income taxes, and investment and capital gains taxes. It even calls for the repeal of our 16th Amendment of our Constitution. So the first reason we should not support the Fair Tax Act is we should be very careful about allowing politicians to alter the Constitution right now. Now it repeals all those taxes and imposes a sales tax, which is kind of ironic because it was a sales tax on tea that led to a party in Boston that sparked a Revolutionary War that caused a Constitution to be written in the first place. So we have officially gone full circle. But the second reason not to support the Fair Sales Tax Act is because the 23% tax rate that everyone's talking about is only for the first year. It's temporary, it's a teaser rate, and after that it will be increased to cover the expanding Social Security and Medicare cost, which is one of the underlying reasons why I think some people want to pass the Fair Sales Tax Act, but are selling it as something else. Because they know that if they make everything we buy more expensive, and it's just hard enough to live in this country, that you and I will be resistant to ever increasing the fair sales tax rate, instead of having an honest conversation about the fiscal issues that are now before us. So the third reason not to support the Fair Sales Tax Act is because it's a coward's way of avoiding a tough conversation about taxes, social programs, and unfunded obligations by pitting us against each other. Now, because the fair sales tax is only on individuals and not on business purchases, this is a real scenario. If a business buys a house as an investment property, there's no fair tax due. But if a family buys that exact same home to raise their family in, they have to pay the fair tax. And putting families at a 23% starting disadvantage to businesses is not a conservative value. So the fourth reason not to support the Fair Sales Tax Act is because not everyone pays the same tax rate, so it should actually be called the Unfair Sales Tax Act. And let me remind you who would be getting that 0% tax rate if the Unfair Sales Tax Act passed. These are the tax gap reports for the last 20 years that I cover in depth in the Tax Gap series. Those reports explain how much tax fraud is being committed on a yearly basis and by who. It's estimated that over $600 billion in taxes are going unpaid because of tax fraud annually. This chart shows what percentage of tax is not being paid by type of income. If you belong to the group that has a normal job and gets a W-2 at the end of the year, it's estimated that you are paying 99% of your taxes and only skipping out on about 1% of your tax obligation. If you belong to the group that owns rental properties and or generates small business sales, it's estimated that your group is not paying 55% of their tax bill, which is insane in itself, but the Unfair Sales Tax Act gives that group the ability to claim purchases for business or investment use and avoid the other 45% of their tax bill altogether. So the fifth reason not to support the Unfair Sales Tax Act is that it makes it way too easy for our biggest tax evaders to evade even more taxes, and tax fraud will increase. If you paid payroll taxes all your life, you funded Social Security and Medicare benefits for other Americans who were receiving benefits. And if you're close to or in retirement and the Unfair Sales Tax Act passes, you would get to fund Social Security and Medicare again by paying the new national unfair sales tax, which is equivalent to double taxation. If you have a Roth IRA and plan on pulling money out someday, you would get to pay the new sales tax to fund Social Security, Medicare, and general government spending again, which is equivalent to double taxation. In fact, if you contributed to any retirement account, you already paid Social Security and Medicare taxes on your contributions. So if you pay the unfair sales tax, it's equivalent to double taxation. So the sixth reason not to support the Unfair Sales Tax Act is because it will cause a lot of double taxation for anyone who's ever saved for retirement or earned income, so basically everyone. Now this is what I like to call the bullshit reason. The Unfair Sales Tax Act states, and I quote, "Most of the practical experience administering sales tax is found at the state government level. It is desirable to harmonize federal and state collection and enforcement efforts to the maximum extent possible. It is sound tax administration policy to foster administration and collection of the federal sales tax at the state level in return for a reasonable administration fee to the states." But let me ask you this. If tax collection by the agency with the most practical experience is an honest goal of the drafters of this legislation, and the Unfair Sales Tax Act doesn't pass, does that mean that they would support the federal government, which has the most practical experience in collecting income taxes, to collect state income taxes and remit those taxes down to the states while subtracting a reasonable administration fee. No, because that section is bull and has nothing to do with harmonizing federal and state collection and enforcement efforts. It's an attempted power grab by the states to control the purse strings. But the bull gets even deeper than that, because it states in regards to audits, such inspection or disclosure shall be permitted only upon written request that sets forth the reasons why such inspection or disclosure is necessary, and is signed by the head of the Bureau of the Office of the Department of the Treasury requesting the inspection or disclosure. So imagine going to someone and saying, "I'll collect your money for you for a cut of the action, and if you want to review the records, send me a letter stating why, which I'll review, and then I'll let you know if you can see them or not." That's crazy stupid. So the seventh reason not to support the Unfair Sales Tax Act is the increased probability of tax fraud through the manipulation and purchase of lower-level politicians via an attempted sly power grab by the states. But before we move on, let's do one more bullshit reason. The Unfair Sales Tax Act states findings related to federal estate and gift taxes. Congress finds further that the federal estate and gift taxes force family businesses and farms to be sold by the family to pay such taxes. So two things. I actually did a 5-part series on estate taxes and reviewed over 100 years of estate tax law, and literally all the information from every estate tax return that was filed in 2016. The number one asset that people died with was stocks at 32.7% of their estate. Number 2 was real estate at 20.2%. Number 3 was reserve assets like retirement assets, cash, and life insurance at 15.6%. And number 4 was bonds at 15%. So that accounts for 84% of all estate assets upon death. Now, business assets, excluding private equity, was 6.8%, and farms, a minuscule 3.7%. That's not saying farms weren't important, but using them to justify eliminating estate taxes on stocks, houses, more stocks, and bonds is disgusting and needs to stop. Keep in mind that in 2023, there is no estate tax that has to be paid unless someone dies with more than $12,920,000 of wealth, or $25,840,000 if they were married, which most farmers were. And there were only 71 possible farms over that value included in the estate tax returns in 2016, out of 2.7 million American deaths. So the idea that we need to get rid of estate taxes to protect farms is absolute bull. And if we do eliminate estate taxes altogether, that will reduce the level of meritocracy in America and lead to additional wealth inequality, because heirs didn't earn it, they paid politicians not to tax it. So the 8th reason not to support the Unfair Sales Tax Act is the repeal of capital gains and estate tax will lead to more wealth inequality, which is expanding fast enough on its own. In 1989, the top 10% of Americans owned 67% of all American wealth. The bottom 50% owned 3%. Fast forward 27 years to 2016, and the top 10% owned 77% of our wealth, the bottom 50% 1%. And the middle class's share has fallen from 30% to 22%, a decrease of 8%, and we can't afford to allow the middle class to shrink anymore. Here's another example of how the Unfair Sales Tax Act will promote an increase in wealth inequality. The person who bought this $3 million ring is a billionaire, is under multiple tax fraud investigations, received at least $400,000 in compensation in 2020, and somehow didn't pay a single dollar of income tax that year. So it's highly probable that if the Unfair Sales Tax Act were to pass, that person would buy that ring in a foreign country that didn't impose sales tax and not report it to authorities to evade $690,000 in sales tax. So the actual expected fair tax to be collected from that purchase is $0. So the 9th reason not to support the Unfair Sales Tax Act is the increased probability of tax fraud on high-cost items outside the United States. But the idea of foreign consumption is not limited to just high-cost purchases. The Unfair Sales Tax Act allows for a sales credit on anything that is exported from the United States for use or consumption outside of the United States. So imagine being able to buy something for resale inside the United States. You wouldn't have to pay the 23% national sales tax because this is a business purchase. If you did, you could file a monthly return and get 100% of that tax back. Then if you export it to a business outside the US, maybe one that you set up in these green areas, you can sell it and you don't have to collect the 23% sales tax. So you can undercut every US seller who is running their business legitimately, and that would be legal. The foreign areas indicated by the green lines would become commerce meccas, and it would be up to buyers of the goods to self-disclose their purchases to the government and voluntarily pay the sales tax due under an honor code, which isn't even working now. So the 10th reason not to support the Unfair Sales Tax Act is that it promotes consumption outside and along the US borders, which is not good for a society built on consumption. Now, I presented 10 reasons in this video, but I could easily keep going because this act is horrible. I can literally feel the political campaign and lobbyist dollars flowing around and in every word of it. It doesn't solve anything, and in fact, it would make solving our debt and long-term obligation issues much harder. So do not support the Fair Tax Act, because it's actually an unfair sales tax act with a temporary teaser rate of 23% that causes double taxation and puts families at a disadvantage to businesses, while leading to increased wealth inequality, tax fraud, and foreign consumption by altering the Constitution via a bullshit power grab that solves nothing and makes everything more expensive, while pitting us against each other to avoid tough conversations on topics that I've already found solutions to. Review those solutions here, do not support the Unfair Sales Tax Act, and vote for me if and when I have to enter the swamp to find out where these ideas that are destroying the middle class are coming from and continuing to destroy the American dream. I'm Stephen Pluga. Invest your time wisely.